Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid Prime Remastered. In the last part we got ourselves the final artifact and item and took care of Meta Ridley at the Chozo Temple at the Impact Crater, and now we're within its deepest reaches for the Endgame. In the case you want to, there is a save point right here that I recommend you use, but thankfully entering the Impact Crater is not a point of no return. If you are missing any items or scan logs that aren't already missable, you can go back and get them right now. But since I already have everything, we're just going to continue right on in and get our scan visor ready immediately, because one of the last scans is right here. I don't know why these little lizard guys are here. I think this is also the only room they're in, but they got a scan. The Lumigek, Phazon charged reptiles. Natives of Town 4, the Lumigeks travel in swarms to increase their odds of survival. They absorb and radiate Phazon energy, making these swarms a threat. Speaking of Phazon, limited data on unknown material available. Material is highly radioactive. Mutagenic qualities at least 86% greater than Phazon. The floors here in the Impact Crater's interior are what I like to call Super Phazon. It damages you even with the Phazon suit equipped. So stay off the floors here. And it's in this room that in certain versions of the GameCube and Trilogy releases, I believe, you can find Fission Metroids for the first time. We've already seen them several times by this point in the game. Now thanks to them being added into the post-Omega Pirate Phazon mines. But on your first run of early versions, this is probably going to be where you see them first. So make sure you have some power bombs ready just to get rid of them. You don't need to worry about getting your missiles stocked up at the ship in the case that you didn't go back for that as well, because there's also one of the last missile recharge station. Well, I know the last missile recharge station in the game right here. That's like what? 3, 4 total, counting the ship? Kind of low in amount. Now, this area might look weird, but it's honestly just a pretty standard platforming segment that you just have to get through. The fact that it looks like the geometry is made out of teeth is definitely a bit weird, but there's some information to make up for that towards why this looks like this in Prime 3 for lore reasons. And once I got back up there after that Metroid screamed, "Hey, get off my face, ah!" We're gonna be heading towards the end game. This next room is the last normal room in the game. After this, it's all boss fight. You're supposed to spider tracks through this, but I'll take the 1, 2 damage. Both the pirate data and Chozo lore did say something might be down here, and we got a lot of Metroid eggs, and for a good reason. This thing is a heavily mutated Metroid, named, as we have been saying the entire game, Metroid Prime. Highly evolved Phazon-producing lifeform. The aberration known as Metroid Prime is the source of Phazon, making it immensely powerful. A genetic flaw makes it's susceptible to certain weapons for brief periods. Only its head is truly vulnerable. Other attacks are a nuisance. Offensively, Metroid Prime has a number of natural and mechanical weapons at its disposal. These include ultra-frigid breath, multi-missiles, snare beams, and particle wave generators. Its massive strength and barbed carapace make it lethal in melee combat. Recommend maximum firepower when engaging this enemy. So, Metroid Prime kinda works off the same logic as the Troopers did. It's gonna have 4 colors that can pulse throughout its body, which are color-coded to the 4 beams, and that color beam is what can actively damage it. When it's yellow, use the power beam, particularly charged shots and super missiles. When it's purple, use the wave beam or wave buster. When it's white, you use the ice beam or ice spreader, and when it's red, just use the plasma beam, don't use the flamethrower. Not worth the missile cost. Because of this, you can use a lot of your missiles pretty quickly in this fight, but you're not going to need them for the phase after this, so don't worry too much about that. If anything, when you start getting lower on health, maybe focus more on using the plasma beam or super missiles if you can, instead of the wave buster and ice spreader just to help save on some missiles, maybe, but it doesn't really matter. Attack-wise, one of the ones you're going to see do the most is when you've done enough damage to stun it and where it hides its weak point, it'll charge across the room, and that charge does damage, but you can hide from it in several of the little trenches dug into the area. Just be careful of its back foot, because in the middle of trench especially, it's pretty easy to get hit by that down the line. Attack-wise, it can fire a couple of different breaths at you, color-coded to the color it's firing. You can fire missiles out of its back. Towards the later part of its health bar, it'll start using a fire breath attack, and a bit of a tractor beam that'll suck you in, and it'll just try to slap you at that point. This physical slaps definitely hurt more than the projectiles overall, but watch out for your health all the same, because this being the final boss, it does really hurt. If you've gotten every missile in the game like we have, you have plenty of offensive options here, but if you're, say, maybe even at like the 150 mark or lower for your missiles, this can get a little tight, so you might have to rely more on charge shots than super missile combos. Every now and then in the fight, once you've reduced enough HP, it does retreat to another level lower in the impact crater. And the most this does is, for one thing, to note how close you are to the end. But that's when it unlocks new attacks, like the tractor beam I just mentioned. There it is. And the biggest thing it changes is the environment you're in. Oh, right, it also has an ice shockwave that can freeze you. I forgot about that one. For instance, here we only have 2 trenches instead of 3, and towards the later rooms, you don't get any trenches to morph ball into to avoid the charge, so you just have to try to kind of worm your way through and hope you don't get hit. This is easily the hardest boss in the game, but at the end of the day, because of how much time you actively have to damage it, how much damage you can do at full potential, and the save point being right there with no real punishment, it's still not a very hard boss. Honestly, it really took until Samus Returns for the series to have bosses I would consider hard on the regular. Like, I can think of like 2 bosses in Prime 2 I consider very hard. Like 1 in Prime 3. Technically this in Prime 1. There's a couple I could call hard in like Super Fusion and all that, but most of those come down to the amount of health you have versus the damage they do on contact. And the only fight I would call hard in Zero Mission is definitely the final boss, but only if you're on a playthrough where you get 100% of the items, or if you're playing on hard mode, period, because of the amount of damage that boss does and the amount of health they have versus your resources. I do gotta say, though, I love the final boss tracks in this game. I think they're a good amount of threatening while still having a kind of catchy rhythm to them. Mind you, that kind of describes Prime 1's soundtrack in general. It's really atmospheric, but it does a good job at actually having a melody that will stick with you for a while. In particular, the Phase 2 theme of this fight, now that we'll hear coming up in a minute, is the start of that has lived in my head for 20 years. This fight definitely used to be scarier to me than it is now, though, if only because either A, I'm used to it, or B, giant enemy crabs aren't exactly intimidating to me anymore. Despite being allergic to shellfish, the ability to kill crabs in games has not been influenced by that. Oh yeah, it also has plasma mines that kind of home in on you that change element depending on what element it is when you uses them. Not that you really get to see those a lot, but they're there, so it's kind of cool. Again, there's a surprising amount to this final boss attack-wise, but your strategy just comes down to dodge, attack, shoot, face. And this is where you really get to see what I was talking about earlier, where with the plasma beam, it does enough damage on its own between its normal shots and charge attacks to be worth using instead of the flamethrower overall. Plus, the flamethrower definitely has the lowest range out of all these super missile combos. Like Wave Bust you can hit from Unleaks like half the room away, and Super and Ice Spreader can just hit all the way across the room, no problem. Prime might be big, but the Wyrm is not exactly the most threatening fight in the series. The Chozo sealing it for as long as they have probably helps with that, admittedly. Well, once we get its HP down to its lowest, it's gonna flee one more time, but this time we're chasing it to the final phase, where things are a little bit different. I love how it just falls down, collapsed like that, oh boy. Switch over to your power beam, because honestly it's just gonna be the thing that serves you the best moving forward. I love the reprisal of the title theme here. Metroid Prime's core essence. Scan indicates that the Phazon energy form of Metroid Prime is invulnerable to all conventional weapons. Only attacks from a Phazon-fused arm cannon will damage it. It generates pools of Phazon when it attacks. Use these to fuel your suit's Phazon weapon system. The entity can also spawn Metroids to assist it in battle, rendering itself invisible when it does so. They actually just summarized the entire fight right there. We can't harm this thing, we just need to dodge its attacks, most of which are either spawning Metroids or a gigantic area-wide shockwave that you can just very easily jump over. Getting too close to it can also damage you just because of touch damage though, so watch out for that. We just gotta wait for it to spawn the blue pool. So every time Metroid Prime spawns a pool of Phazon, you have to stand in it, and then your hyper mode engages and you can just damage it outright. I forget if holding the button does more damage overall, or if tapping it every here and there and holding for a second does more damage. I recall speedrunners having one way or the other. But either way, whenever it spawns a pool of Phazon, it does actively swap its visibility to a different visor. It starts in the normal visor, then it goes to X-ray, then thermal, then back to normal, and it cycles through from there. So depending on how long you take to kill this thing, you'll go through a couple different cycles of your visor. It does spawn Metroids of all types, be it normal, hunter, or fission, but it only tends to do that towards the latter, I think it's like the latter 2/3 or latter half of its health bar, and to make that easier on your soul, just place a power bomb and it'll kill basically all the Metroids instantly besides Prime itself. In certain versions of the game, this fight can definitely be a little weird in its pattern though, in that it's entirely up to RNG whether or not Prime decides to place down a piece of Phazon to begin with. And if you're standing on the Carapace's corpse in certain versions as well, Metroid Prime's behavior just gets a little weird apparently, so be careful. Stay kinda close to it, but not close enough that you'll just eat face tank damage, essentially. This fight's iconic, but it's not exactly hard. If you've made it past the Carapace fight, honestly, you're good. I'd say the hardest fight of the final three is probably, honestly, Meta Ridley, as well Metroid Prime can do more damage. The fight, I think, is much more active at the least, so you can dodge more and feel more engaged. Gotta say, though, I love the texture updates this thing got. This thing already looked kind of ghastly in the original game, but whenever something had this kind of, like, ghostly effect going on in the original Prime, there was kind of a shininess to it that made it look like it was made of gel, which I can understand being the case for Metroid Prime, but for some of the other things it was a little weird. If there's anything that the Switch's hardware really empowers with this game, it's the visuals and stuff like this. The main reason you're going to want to use a power bomb to kill all the Metroids, not only just to get rid of all of them at once, by the way, if you get hit out of the Phazon pool while attacking Metroid Prime, you're knocked out of hyper mode and the damage you're doing just completely stops. So if you want to get this done in as few cycles as possible, you're just going to want to kill them all at once. Same goes for contact damage with Metroid Prime or the Shockwave. If you get knocked out of the pool, it's just kind of annoying. But due to that, you might actually experience a little bit of what we even see a little bit, I think, later in this fight. I mentioned several parts ago that there's this weird, consistent issue in Remastered, it feels like, where the Morph Ball transformations can be buffered if, say, you're getting hit or doing another animation while you're unfurling. And because that, you might accidentally transform back into your Morph Ball phase when you really don't want to be in there. It's more just a minor time loss, if anything, but it can definitely be distracting and weird to feel your control get wretched like that when it doesn't really do that for the rest of the game, because if you haven't figured it out by now, this game controls honestly like a dream. Sure, it was a little weird with the control scheme on the GameCube, but still, like, felt good to move there once you got used to it. Here with the twin-stick first-person shooter controls, this game is damn near top 10 first-person shooters I've ever played because of how well this all goes now. And the visual upgrades are just honestly a nice piece of cake on top of that. Ooh, so close. I believe that is mostly my fault at this point though, because again, I'm not sure if holding the button down the entire time does more damage, or if rhythmatically pressing and letting go does more damage with the Hyper Beam. Speedrunners have that figured out. I ain't one of those, and I doubt I'll ever be. Because the amount of out of bounds in this game is terrifying to me conceptually. But if you got enough health, you got enough resources, this fight isn't too bad. The first phase is definitely the more dangerous one just because of the damage output on top of you having to use your missiles more, which are a limited resource overall. Kind of weird that missiles don't play into this phase at all, though, barring maybe taking care of the Metroids it spawns. Huh. Oh, and there's the transformation I was talking about. I didn't press that button. At least not anytime remotely close to that. There we go. Yes, there are 8 minutes of credits in Ending. It's kind of ridiculous, but oh well. Before I get into my opinions, I do want to kind of talk about the elephant in the room here. We got the credits here, of course. They credit all the people involved here in the remaster, but they don't directly credit all the people who worked on the original and trilogy versions of Metroid Prime. They just go, thanks to all Metroid Prime and trilogy original staff. And I think that's a little scummy, myself, honestly. It's not hard to get those, like, type sheets, probably, from, like, Retro's old documents or something. Credit your developers, even if when it's a remake. It's the best thing to do. But Metroid Prime! This game's fantastic. I do think its structure has a couple of problems here and there, particularly how I wish more areas were connected to others through more ways. Phendrana being only connected to Magmore's a little annoying. Phazon Mines' main entrance being a one-way thing, more or less. Or it can only be gotten to from one place, rather, is a little annoying. But how they got the Metroid formula down pat on their first try in 3D, even if people were wary of the first-person shooter aspect of it to start, is fantastic. Honestly, barring the 2.5D nature of Samus Returns and Dread, I can't see a 3D Metroid working any other way nowadays. Like, the closest you could get maybe is something like a Devil May Cry, I guess, if they went down that road again with Other M, but they actually made the exploration a focus, but I can't see that working as well as this did here overall. The music's fantastic, the scan books add a lot of character to the world and lore, by allowing you to actually investigate the story at your own pace through that and completely see the world, the story unfold before the eyes of people before you. I am shocked at how good this game is still, even this long later. And the new controls for Remastered really do give it new life, because I liked this game on the GameCube, but even I have to admit that looking back, the game controls like GoldenEye in the bad way with the toggleable controls, and it just doesn't feel as natural anymore to go back to, even with me being used to it. Even the motion controls in Prime 3 and Trilogy feel easier to go back to than the GameCube controls for this. But in case you want to use it, at least the original controls are there. There's a way to place this, sort of like its Trilogy. This game's very approachable nowadays, I find. And I'm really hoping we eventually get a remaster in this vein for 2 and 3. I know for 3 that could be apparently a big problem because if memory serves, the Wii Motion stuff is actually, like, programmed deep into the engine of 3 or something to make it work right, so that could probably be a bit less likely overall than a 2 remaster, but a 2 remaster would be great to see how they maybe fix some structure stuff in that game. Because Prime 1 structure, at the end of the day, the biggest problem with it is the key hunt on a first playthrough, because you don't know where those artifacts are. The hints give you ideas, but it's the most out-of-the-way a search gets in a Metroid game for required things. And that's kind of annoying. Prime 2 goes more out of the way somehow, which is impressive, but at least nowadays, on repeat playthroughs, you realize, okay, you can get a lot of these along the way if you know where they are, but knowing where they are is the key part there. I think the weirdest part about this game, looking back, is that it doesn't have a self-destruct timer to escape in at the end. Like, yeah, usually... Yeah, there's one in the game with the friggin' Orphean escape, but usually if Metroid games have that, they have 2, they have like one near the start and the end. Having one only at the start's kind of weird. And to its credit, Prime 2 and 3 get that right. So as I've mentioned throughout the LP, if we're getting 100% in the game, by and large you just get more concept art in the gallery. And some of those are locked behind higher difficulty, so I think if you want to get everything in the gallery unlocked, you need to 100% the game on hard mode. That's mostly what the scan logs for, besides lore. At least with items, you get not only a slightly different ending screen, but you also get a cutscene after the mission accomplished screen that comes up at the end of the credits. I guess I actually should say, there are technically different endings in this game, quote-unquote, but it more or less is just a difference of how much you see. Sort of like Castlevania Bloodlines in that regard. If you got, I think it's like 74% or items or less, you see that cutscene where the temple explodes, but right before Samus takes off her helmet, it fades to black. 75, I think, to like 99 is everything we just saw, but you just don't get the scene after the credits, and then 100% is you see all of it. For beating the game as well, in the GameCube version, you would be able to then use the Metroid Fusion suit on repeat playthroughs, and you would also have access, I think, by using a link cable to Metroid Fusion to the original Metroid on either game. Not that that's a big deal, but Apparently, originally, Super Metroid was meant to be implemented as the playable game, but something about the developers using a third-party emulator made that plan get cancelled, so If watching this game didn't convince you, I do recommend you find a way to play to try it out for yourself, because this can be... Metroid's in general one of those games that are probably a lot more interesting to play than watch for a very specific target audience. And if you're in that, give it a shot, it might be worth it. If you want to play this, there's the original GameCube release, there's the Trilogy release, which was available on the Wii and Wii U via its eShop, even though it has now shut down, so, yarhar, if you feel me drift. And then there's the remaster here. So it's honestly, thinking about it, I didn't really realize it's actually available on all of the more recent consoles Nintendo's made since the GameCube. Huh. Sure, copies of this are probably getting up there in price, especially Trilogy. The Steelbook copy of Trilogy I have somewhere in my house, that especially is probably the most expensive Metroid thing I own, even though I got it for like 40 bucks, I think, or something like that. I guess there also was, now I think about it, a version of this on the Wii that wasn't tied to Trilogy. It was like a new Play Control release, but I think that may have been Japan only. Same with Prime 2, they just decided to skip those and just release the Trilogy on the whole. Also, if memory serves, once quality assurance scrolls off the screen, that's where... There it is, there's the kind of scummy part. It's not hard to just, like, speed these credits, scroll speed up, and include the original game staffs, guys. Come on. But that's the credits, that's the game. It's time for us to see our completion percentage and see how we did. I love this version of this song so much. That is actually, I think, my fastest time clearing the game overall. If I've gotten faster than that, it's only by a few minutes overall throughout my life. 100% in this game isn't the hardest out of all the Metroid games. It's pretty approachable, but it's not for everyone. Some players just prefer to go through naturally and see what they can pick up along the way. And you know what? I like doing that myself in my favorite Metroid game, so mood. The worm rises once again. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, have a great night, take care, and I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be, next time we see Metroid. If it's not a Prime 2 remaster, it'll probably be Samus Returns overall. See you guys then.